Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? It is day 21 already of RPG A Day 2018, and our question or prompt for today is a really good one. Which dice mechanic appeals to you? Very difficult one for me to answer because, to be honest with you, they all do to a certain extent. I am just fascinated by dice mechanics, and there's so many questions you can ask when you're looking at one of these dice mechanics, especially from a design perspective. Like, what exactly are we trying to model with this dice mechanic? Why? What sort of outcomes are the dice being called to produce? Are they simple, success or failure, or is it pulling in all these various meta considerations, or whatever? And there's just tons of things that designers put into games. How many different fictional prompts, if you will, are possible from one roll? There's various results you can get on the dice, but what do they actually mean? And when do we decide, or how do we decide when to roll them and when not to roll them? And this list of questions is pretty much endless. So, in a very real sense, which dice mechanic appeals to me at any given time depends upon what effect it's being called upon to produce, because different mechanics produce really, really different feels. And depending on what kind of feel the game is going for, whether it's pulp heroics or hyper competent characters, or really gritty, or God knows what, these various dice mechanics are being called upon to emulate or produce that as best they can. Some mechanics do a great job at producing certain tones and certain genres. Some don't do as good of a job. When they do it really well, that appeals to me on this aesthetic sense. Like, wow, they really nailed this feel with this particular dice mechanic. Even though I might not actually like how it finally, ends up. Like, there are games when you're really hyper competent, when failure isn't on the table or is very unlikely. They're not bad games. They're less favorites of mine. They appeal to me less, but I can appreciate them on an aesthetic sense. Like, wow, they really, really, they nailed that. It's a different strokes for different folks kind of thing. Percentile dice have always appealed to me. I've always really liked that, and to a very real extent, everything. All dice rolls can be boiled down to percentage chances. This is just how math works. It doesn't matter how many different permutations or results are possible. You can take, doesn't matter if you're rolling this big giant fistful of, rainbow-colored Star Wars, FFG Star Wars dice. You can figure out exactly, which combinations, have what percentage chance of coming up of all these various symbols, and model it. And if you get enough D10s together, and you use dice for tens and units and tenths and hundredths and thousandths, you can actually model that die roll. It's easier to just roll the fistful of dice, but in theory, you can use these percentile dice to do anything. And I've looked at percentile dice systems which are really, really very crunchy and very granular, and ones that are a little bit simpler. But I really like percentile dice because part of the reason is it's just easy for people to conceptualize. Well, what are my chances here, or what are the chances of any given thing happening? Because we kind of understand percentages. We've just kind of grown up that way, so it's easy to wrap your head around. Really elegant mechanic. So I love percentile dice. I have become really enamored with dice pools over the past few years, quite a bit. I really like the Ubiquity dice pools. That's a really elegant system. But let's talk about dice pools just a little bit. There is this criticism that linear die rolls, like say D20 or percentile dice, are too swingy, and that argument really doesn't hold water if you're just talking about simple pass-fail. And I'll give you an example. If you've got, let's say we're going to use Ubiquity dice, so they're pass-fail dice, If you're looking to score at least 5 successes, or 4 successes rather, on 8 dice, 8 Ubiquity dice, your die pool, if you will, your chance of scoring at least those 4 successes is roughly 65%. It's really 63.67, but who's counting? If you're rolling a D20, and you want to get at least an 8, well then your chances, I think, if I did my math right, at least 65% of the time you're going to score at least an 8. If both of these mechanics, whether it's the die pool or the D20 roll, you're just looking for success or failure, it doesn't really matter what number shows up on the dice. The D20 isn't any swingier or more random than the die pool one, because all you're looking for is a success or failure. However, where die pools really come into their own is if that degree of success or failure matters. because a die pool will start to cluster around the middle. It gives you this nice bell curve. And so the most likely result is going to be that average result. And the next most likely are going to be the results which would model performing just below or just above your level of competence. So when you're looking to model like how competent somebody is and how are they going to perform based on their level of competence, dice pools are great. You know, something like the Ubiquity dice pool does a great job of this. You know the Fate or Fudge mechanic does a really good job too. Most dice pools give you that realistic, for lack of a better word, representation of a person of a given competence at a given skill is going to perform at that level of competence most of the time. Every once in a while, they're going to perform a little below or above. But the Hail Marys or the I can't believe you just tripped over your own shoelaces, those are going to happen on a vanishingly small percentage of time, which is great for modeling real life. However, if your intention is to have those Hail Marys and those kind of abysmal failures show up a little bit more often than like almost never, then you really want to look at something like a D20 or percentage die roll, where the roll doesn't just mean pass or fail, it also indicates how high or low a number you roll on this linear die roll indicates a degree of success or failure. They'll show up more often. It's not going to be as realistic, but it will give you that that feel of having those amazing successes and unbelievable failures. They'll show up a lot more often. Which one you want, well, it depends on what kind of feel you're going for in the game. It's hard to say one is better than the other. Although, like right now, I'm really just enjoying the Ubiquity die pool system, so that's pretty cool. Then again, every once in a while, you know, an old standard, even though it's an ancient mechanic, sometimes those are very, very appealing. And so it's tough for me, like in a situation where I'm not really sure what else to do, and we're talking about like a game where I'm just, you know, we can house rule a little bit. I'm not talking about playing raw. You know, OSR games or whatnot. Sometimes it's hard to beat the good old D6, you know? A situation comes up, it's unexpected, you're called upon to, like, make up a mechanic. What are we going to use here at this particular point in time? You can represent a pretty good range of competence, if you will, or difficulty with a single D6 roll. Is this like a Hail Mary? Okay, you have a 1 in 6 chance. You know, roll D6, try for low. Is it hard? Okay, well, you have a 2 in 6 chance. 50-50, 3 in 6 chance. That's pretty obvious, kids. Is it pretty easy? Okay, well, you have a 4 in 6 chance. Is it almost a sure thing? We have a 5 in 6 chance. It does a pretty darn good job at modeling, you know, those levels of competence or chances of success or failure. So D6 roll isn't for everything, but it does have its place. So not really sure if I answered the question or picked one favorite, but like I said, I like a whole bunch of them. Take it easy, kids. I will talk to you tomorrow about non-dice mechanics.